Meet PitchDB, the ultimate platform for speakers looking to make their mark on podcasts, conferences, and media outlets. PitchDB provides access to over 3 million platforms, ensuring you find the perfect avenue for your message. With AI integrations, your bios and pitches are tailored uniquely to each opportunity, giving you the edge you need. Join now at pitchdb.com.
Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. All the way from London, UK, I'm very thrilled to have Menekse Stewart join us on the show to unravel everything AI-driven. Menekse, thank you for being here. I'd love to hear, because what we realize is that AI tools have been around a lot longer than we realize. We've all been using it, but people get this sense of fear about AI infiltrating our lives. So I'd love for you to talk about, of course, that, but I want to understand what your journey was to the world of AI.
Yeah, so I actually started out in search engine optimization when I was 15, back in 2005. My family were just dealing with some financial hardship, so I found a job online, and it was to rewrite articles for this SEO agency. And I got paid $3 per article to rewrite medical advice. And I always joke that like Google's algorithm updates over the years have made sure that the advice that you're Googling now was not written by a 15-year-old who was paid $3 to write it. With different keyword stuffing. But from that point, it really was the start of just a fascination with communication on the internet and, you know, how we communicate, how we position ourselves, how we can add value to the internet and different things. So I worked with different agencies as a freelancer, did a lot of copywriting, and then started to actually help agencies build out their workflows and systems for delivering SEO for clients across different. SEO is one of those things where it's like multiple industries. Once you know how to do it, you can kind of work pretty much with any business. And so I was really able to see a cross section of different businesses of different sizes. And in around 2016, 2017, I started to work as a freelance head of marketing for different thought leaders and content creators, people who have a podcast or a book or, a body of work and a body of content. To build out evergreen funnels and to really help with messaging and consistency across launches, across website and digital content. And it was in 2017 that Google's first big algorithm impact that's sort of informed by machine learning rolled out. And we started to move away from the need for exact match keywords because Google's algorithms can detect, the intent and context of a page. And so that was really the start of AI having a really big impact on the way that we find information on the internet. And generative AI obviously has been much more part of people's consciousnesses for the last 18 months. But even prior to that, in sort of 2020, 2021, we were seeing some tools that were using generative AI to help with the creation of things like marketing content. And so I think that there's just always been a fascination for me for emerging technologies and how the internet has grown and how we communicate what we're doing, who we're doing it for, some of these tools. So yeah, AI is like the next evolution of the technology that we've already seen for many years in the search space. So
absolutely. So let's talk about search. Search is still important, but it's just evolved.
Yeah. So really my recommendations for small business owners in particular are always that if you understand who your customer is and what you're doing for them, you can show up in any iteration of the internet and any platform that comes around because you know what your message needs to be in order to communicate with your ideal customers. Search is, the way that search engine optimization grew as a sort of technical piece and as a sort of tactic in general. For a lot of years, it has been finding loopholes in Google's algorithms to exploit in order to get traffic. But Google's advice has always been just make sure that your website is the best experience for your customer as possible. Make sure that your content is as good quality as possible. Make sure that your website loads as quickly as possible, that it's clear for people to be able to find what it is that you have to offer. And so if we take this really customer-centered approach to what we're doing in our businesses, we are able to evergreen our businesses in the face of changing search and make sure that ultimately the people who need what we have to offer can find us because we've used clear language that meets them at the point of their express need.
Cool.
And so that's sort of the idea of search, is that the algorithms are going to continue to change and continue to try to make it as easy as possible for people to find the exact context that they're looking for. And that might mean that we have less traffic for a little while, fewer website visitors, but ultimately it's never really been about the quantity of traffic. It's more about the quality of traffic. And so we want to keep that at the top of our mind as we are building out different content assets and things in our businesses moving forwards.
Yeah, I've heard that in the past, you needed to make sure that you had certain keywords on each page a certain number of times, and that has shifted. Other people talk about video as the latest SEO tool and trend. I'd love to hear your perspective on both of those issues. What's really important when you're thinking about building out, because of course you want to build out the content that will reach your ideal customer persona or avatar, but do you need to have the same words on every page? Do you need to have different ones depending on if it's the page where you're selling or the introduction page? And then what about video?
Yeah, so to address the keyword piece, we don't rank websites, we rank web pages. So that's always a good reminder to keep in your pocket, is that it's not your website that's ranking at number one, even if it is technically a website, because, it is your site, but it's actually the web page. So each of the web pages in our businesses should have a key topic that it is covering in depth. So if you are creating a landing page, and I'm going to take AI just because of the topic of the interview, using AI in your small business, I only want to have one page on my website that talks about that specific thing. I might then have, 10 ways to use AI in your marketing as a small business owner that links across to using AI in your small business.
Ooh.
So that's where the concept that HubSpot created around content pillars, where you have like a core topic and then you have different blog posts, really comes in handy for thinking about how you structure your content. You really want to be asking yourself, does this content need to exist as a new page on my website, or can it be added to an existing page to improve the quality of it? And the key thing is is it all relevant to the same topic? So you're not going off on a tangent, you are staying sort of true to one particular theme. And that really captures the essence of what we're doing with keyword optimization, is we're optimizing for one particular phrase, keyword phrase. Because we've moved away from exact match keywords, you don't need to have your keywords in your blog post, your page content a certain number of times, but you do want to make sure that there is contextual language that is being used in your content, so that a classic example is Apple, the computer company, is using language around technology, not around advice. So that's just to kind of help with streamlining how you think about what search engine optimization is doing. It's ultimately making sure that there are pages on your website that provide a comprehensive answer to a particular topic or theme. Sometimes that is going to be a commercial thing because people are searching for, small business owner AI course. And then other times it's informational because it's like, how do I even start using AI in my business? So we are always making sure that when we're creating content, we're not trying to optimize a sales page for how do I use AI in my small business, because somebody who searches for how do I use AI in my small business wants information. They want to understand more about the context. They want to understand more about what is going on before they're at a point of being able to make a purchase decision. And so the framework that I always recommend people use is the idea of the customer journey, and map against your business the different content assets that you have that address things at different stages of the customer journey, and make sure that you're not just optimizing your website only for purchase based things, because if you're doing that, you're missing out on a whole lot of traffic. But it's really just thinking about your website visitors as real humans who've got a variety of questions, concerns, worries, emotions that they're experiencing. And you want to design an experience for them that brings them through all of the information they need to know without getting overwhelmed. So hopefully that covers the keyword side of things. And then in terms of video, part of the reason that people have lent into YouTube and to video content for SEO is because YouTube is the second biggest search engine after Google, and it's obviously owned by Google as well. When you create optimized video content, you are able to also get increased visibility in Google's results page because they've got a videos tab, and it means that you can, get more visibility to your content. So with video marketing, you're really looking at a form of longer term content marketing. It's ultimately hosted on YouTube, not on your website necessarily. And if somebody finds that video in search results, and they click on it, they're going to go over to a YouTube channel rather than to your website. So it's similar to something like a podcast episode, right? You've got a piece of content that is going to last in your business because people can find it, people can explore your business, find out more about you for, months or years after it's published, but it isn't actually on your website and they're not necessarily finding your website when they click on that result. So I think the other reason that video is increasingly important in the age of AI, as it were, is because it demonstrates that you're a real person and it can really build trust and credibility. And so getting comfortable with communicating on camera, and whether it's doing live streams or it's recording content, is something that can really help with engaging with your audience and make sure that people feel really comfortable with the fact that you're a real person. So that's really the benefit of it. And, a really quick win that people can sort of implement relatively quickly is adding a video to your sales pages. So if you're a service provider or if you're selling courses or programs or anything where there is a longer form piece of text, summarizing that text into a video script using AI, you can then record a video where it's you talking about what the offer is, but you're able to add a little bit more of yourself into it, and people who watch it can get a sense of how you communicate and whether they feel, a sense of connection with you to take that, next step to find out more. So that's something that I think is an important factor when it comes to really understanding that the people who visit your website are human beings who have trust issues. We all have trust issues.
Yeah, I love that you said that video is a great way to show that you're a real person. Because sometimes I go to websites and people have avatars instead of their headshots. And it's cute, sure, and it's technology, but it's not showing me that that is the person that I'm actually speaking with. And so I think you're really hitting on something here, which I don't think people talk about much, is that this is the way to continue making sure that we have the human-to-human connection, which is so important in marketing and sales.
Yeah, and I think there's, an issue with AI avatars and voice tools that we haven't necessarily considered, which is when we create them, what permissions are we giving to tech companies to own our biometric data? So we use Face ID to unlock our phones and our phones have like our banking and all kinds of things on. And when we create an AI avatar, what are the terms and conditions that we are agreeing to at the point that we upload our likeness to something to create those types of things? So I think that's something that as we, especially as business owners, where we've got a lot more riding on, like, if somebody accesses our systems and things as business owners, like it's our whole livelihoods. It's not just a case of, our personal lives that are impacted, our professional lives are really significantly at risk as well. And the same with voice tools. So it's like, I'm all for playing with novelty and trying out new things. But quite often the tools that we're seeing that are emerging allow people to hide behind insecurities that ultimately are just that they are human. And so it's that sense of like, yeah, I might not like how I look on camera. I might be really aware that I talk quickly sometimes and end up using more filler words than I would like to use. And some of those things that we become aware of the more that we inspect ourselves. But the people who are listening to us aren't noticing or critiquing us in the way that we're critiquing ourselves. And even if they are, people who are doing really well in life and who are emotionally mature and who've got really healthy relationships are not about to turn around to you and say, you are really unprofessional and also you've got really poor fashion sense. And, any of those things, like they're not going to turn around to you and do that. The only people who are ever going to point out the things that you feel insecure about are people who need therapy and have, are hurting in some way and they're lashing out on the internet. So I think for a lot of us, we might be tempted to use these things because of a sense of we don't need to be visible if we're using an AI avatar. I do know that some people use it for religious reasons. Like I have a lot of Muslim family who don't pictures of themselves online and things like that. But I do think that there's also a really large proportion of people who are like, oh, great, I can create this, avatar of myself who is like the perfect version of me if I didn't have the flaws that I'm insecure about. And so when we look at AI and how it's developed, a lot of the people behind it are trying to sterilize the mess of what it means to be human, where they are creating automated systems that don't require them to manage team who've got personal lives and all of that kind of thing. Or you've got, people who are in the tech and innovation space who want to create a way for themselves to live forever. And, like, oh, my brain is so great, I'm going to encapture it in an AI model and it can, live far beyond my human life ever does. But ultimately, when we are looking at this technology, it's like how much of it is trying to escape the reality of life if you are a parent or a child, or you've got relationships or families and you live in community and you've just got health issues, you're managing all kinds of things, you're pulled in every direction. So I think there's an existential piece to AI that causes a lot of people to feel uncomfortable intrinsically, because it's making us aware of like, oh, what is it that differentiates me from this productive machine that can do things really quickly and knows more than me and it works faster than me? And, am I ever going to work again? All of the spiraling that happens. But I think that as business owners, as digital influencers, as, whatever it is, whatever your role is on the internet, being really comfortable with your weaknesses and the things that you might feel insecure about, but owning that they are the reason that you are so good at what you do in other areas, and that those are the things that make you uniquely human. They are part of your experience, they're part of your story. And that is something that AI can never replicate, it can only mimic. And so even if it does a good job of mimicking things sometimes, those are the things that make you who you are. And they are the things that enable you to have connection and to really build out empathy in your messaging and in your online presence.
And this obviously goes straight into the segue perfectly to talk about your experience with AI tools and helping create systems for small business owners. Right. Interestingly, I'm on the Intuit Small Business Council in the States. And next week, we are talking to Congress about AI and the future of AI and how important it is to small businesses to help streamline. But I think part of the issue is that a lot of people, they get scared, but then they get overwhelmed because there are so many tools out there. You don't know where to start, which ones are still going to be stable, which ones are not just these startups that then are going to get folded into somebody else or just run out of money. So I'd love to hear more about your AI journey and then how you help utilize it now and what you've seen, how it's worked for your business and then how it works for other people's businesses.
Yeah, so I have basically fallen into a bit of like a wormhole in the last 18 months of like how do we make sure that when we're using generative AI, we do so in a way that is ethical and sustainable and that also addresses issues around, data privacy, intellectual property, as well as enabling us to be more fully in the things that we feel that we have creative flow in, that bring us joy, that are the spaces that we started our businesses for in the first place. So the majority of people who start a small business start it from a place of the things they enjoy doing, the things that they're experienced in, the things that they're passionate about, the things that they really want to, see happen. Like there's a huge amount of heart in the small business space. And like, yes, obviously you want to make money as well, but there's a real sense of wanting to impact the world. And I work a lot with creatives and creators who want to make the world a more beautiful place. And they address hard things, but they do it through beauty and they do it through, expressing things visually. And so when we think about the use of AI for small businesses, especially if your voice is very connected to what you do and your, the way that your brain works and all of those things, AI can feel like it's taking something away from you instead of adding space. And so the way that I look at it is that you don't need to wash all of your dishes by hand, only need to wash the crystal wine glasses that are not dishwasher safe and maybe passed down from like generations of your family. So you keep your time and your energy for the things that are the most precious and that are going to hurt the most if they break. And so when we think about using, artificial intelligence, there are so many functional things that are required in our businesses that take us away from the fun things in our businesses, that actually we can use AI to help us automate 70% of them. Yeah. And then 30% of the time that we have left can be spent on adding the extra sparkle that makes, our business messaging what it is. So if we think about something like a sales page, if you just have an idea for something and you're creating like a product page or sales page or some kind of, early stage piece of content to get that out into the world, even if you just work at it solidly, you're looking at a minimum of 12 hours, but in all likelihood, probably 40 hours of work to pull out something that is like productized and able to be put in front of customers, minimum like 40 hours. And then that doesn't account for all of procrastination and overthinking that happens in the in-between time as well. So I personally have, spent 18 months overthinking a sales page for something, even though I have no problem writing them for clients and customers. But it's because ultimately I know what I want to do, but the sales page is like a functional piece of content that my customers need in order to know whether it's the right thing for them, but it's a functional piece of communication. And so it was one of the things that got me started down, okay, how do I take, all my years of marketing experience and create a framework here that is going to make this faster for myself? And then once I'd done that, I was in a business mastermind and like all the people in the mastermind were like, Menekse, give me access to this right now. So that's kind of where it started. But I challenged myself and said, okay, what would it look like if I could go from idea to implementation and implemented in 10 minutes? And so my challenge was that. And the first time I created a sales page with AI, it took 2 minutes, 24 seconds to generate the sales page. And that was an early version of it, but it still sounded a lot more like me than anything that ChatGPT would have been able to come up with as well. And that little wormhole of like, how do I make sure that it sounds as close to me as possible without it having access to all of my data? I don't want ChatGPT or AI to be able to write a sales page exactly how I would write it, because I don't want them to be able to put in the anecdotes and experiences and the specific things that are unique to my way of thinking about it, because that would mean that's in the public domain and it's not something that I want to be out there. So it's just that sense of, where are the areas in your business where you are seeing where you're getting stuck? You feel like you might be in a rut. You know that you have like a really common experience is like you have a lot of ideas, but then the amount of things that you need to do to get the idea out into the world create this sense of losing momentum. And then ultimately it just becomes no longer, a fun and creative project because you're like, I've got all of this stuff to do in order to get this out there. So how can we automate some of the areas that are the most draining, that cause you to feel like a lack of energy after you've had to sit and do them for a few hours? And AI actually can allow us to have so much more space and creativity because we are able to automate the things that we don't feel as strong at so that they're 70 to 80% done, and then spend our available time doing the things that light us up, that bring us joy, that we feel really excited about, that are the reasons that we often began our businesses to do in the first place. And so there are so many concerns around the, ethics of AI, etc., that are all very legitimate. And that's a conversation that we absolutely need to be having. But part of the reason that so many people feel ill at ease when it comes to adopting AI is because we understand that a lot of the business structures that we have seen, especially on the internet, have commoditized human work to the point that we feel replaceable. And so there are wider societal issues that it's triggering for us when we look at AI, because we feel like our livelihood is at stake if something can be more productive than we are. And so that's where the issue comes in. It's not that AI intrinsically is bad in and of itself. It's that we can understand, because even if it's subconscious, we can understand that where we are now as a society has sort of come from this constant desire to automate, to innovate, to add tech, to disrupt industries. And that industry disruption isn't necessarily a good thing, because the people who've innovated on the internet haven't taken responsibility for the societal impact of that innovation. And so there are very legitimate concerns, but it doesn't mean that AI in and of itself is intrinsically bad. And what I always encourage small businesses is that actually for us to use AI to automate, to give ourselves more space, to give ourselves more ability to think clearly, to have space to be creative, to think about things in new and fresh ways, enables us to do things like lobby the government and to lobby the lawmakers and to be involved in. Also, lobbying means probably something different in the UK than it does in the US. Like say culturally there there's like a difference there, but just using our voices to really advocate for our communities, for our spaces, to say like, we don't have a problem with AI, but actually we need to have things like minimum wage. We need to look at what it looks like for people to be paid a fair and living wage in light of automation, reducing the amount of active hours that people need to be sat at desks and things like that. So there's a lot of like, things around creative and intellectual property and how that's used on the internet, etc. as well. I had a really interesting conversation with Chandler from Lethal Legal just around the fact that law takes a while to catch up with technology. So technology is innovating, but law takes longer to kind of catch up. And what we are seeing at the moment is a lot of tech companies benefiting from the gaps in the law and the loopholes.
Yeah.
So, how do we advocate for ourselves, for our businesses, for our spaces? If we are stuck in constantly doing every single thing manually by hand, like washing every dish by hand, we don't have that space to think, okay, but actually the wider impact of this, I'm going to go along to this meeting, I'm going to go along to this group of people, and I'm going to add my voice and be involved in the community impact of business and what it looks like for us as business owners to both shape and inform our communities and our spaces moving forward into the future.
Yeah. Well, and that's something I've heard from different AI experts who've been in the field for even 20 years and have patents and do different things. And what I get from them is this sense of optimism that AI is going to make those tasks that you're talking about so much easier for us to handle. And it's actually going to create new jobs. And I've seen that, there are now, you have AI, but you also still have to have people who have oversight. And data compliance is a huge job, right? There are so many things that are going to be created, but it's also going to give us a space to be more creative. And one person, Manoj Agarwal, even told me that it's going to help decrease the cost of living.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the impact on the cost of living is an interesting one because we're not necessarily seeing that happen at a corporate level at the moment. And I just am always reticent to be that optimistic unless actual rules and guidelines are put in place that these sort of bigger corporate companies have to adhere to. So I think that I definitely live in the space of AI is a helpful tool, but I'm not really optimistic about it creating an oasis of like human freedom. I think like we need to be, super mindful of how we adopt it and of actually the ways that it can be misused by the people who hold the most power in society at the moment are really significant. And we're seeing that with, some of the lawsuits and things that OpenAI have been faced with in terms of public domain information. The value of creative work is something that we do want to be super mindful of as language models are built out. It wouldn't have been unreasonable for some of these, AI companies to pay fairly for the use of creative works to train these models. And I think that especially with, visual AI as well, as we're using that, we're seeing there's not enough data to create a really strong base of training for the model, not to have to rely on the works of specific people for it to sort of, mimic the works of existing artists, etc.
Right.
So it's things like that where we want to be comfortable to say, actually, no, that's not what are our lines. Like for me, I don't use visual generative AI at the moment because I don't feel totally comfortable with the fact it draws from a lot of effectively intellectual property of artists and so on. But when it comes to the text-based stuff, it's got such a huge base of data that is behind the training of it that at this point it is predictive text on steroids. It's, it's a mathematical process that's happening very quickly as we're engaging with it. And it can feel like it's, magical or something, but ultimately it really isn't. It's just maths behind the scenes. And I think understanding that helps to alleviate a lot of the anxiety and fear that people feel around AI in general, because it's like, okay, well, it's not going to develop consciousness and destroy humanity. Because it's ultimately predicting patterns and we can ask it for support with, sales page or customer journey or something like that. And it's able to give us a response based on the context that we're giving to it. So, yeah.
What is one of the things that you see people do incorrectly when they start using AI tools in their businesses? Like, what's a mistake that you have to help people unravel?
Yeah, so I would say like putting any of your intellectual property into ChatGPT is like my top thing where I'm like, stop doing that. You can use platform.openai.com. Obviously with ChatGPT, you can exclude your data and set it up so that it doesn't keep your conversation on record. But putting things into ChatGPT is the equivalent of putting it into the public domain. So just for anyone who is a creator, if you've got writing or especially if you've got like a book or something, I would just really recommend using private API or a private sort of large language interface to do any work with regards to that kind of thing. And then also AI generated content can't be copyrighted. So if you were to just use what you have pulled out of an AI model without doing any editing to it, without using it as a tool in your creative process, and you were to just pull that out and put it out into the world, you don't own any copyright for that. And if somebody else creates the exact same thing or AI gives them the same response, you don't have a course of action when it comes to a claim for copyright on that material. So that's also just something to be really mindful of. The creative process with AI needs to be interwoven with our own experiences and so on as well, in order for us to create a finished piece that, yes, uses AI, but also is not wholly generated by AI when it comes to published works and digital products and things like that.
That, I think, is probably what I see as the number one mistake, is people who think they could just put some prompts in, get material, and then we've heard about how, and I've actually done this so that I can tell people, don't do it this way, right? Because if I ask for sources, sometimes the sources don't really exist for the data that it's supposedly giving me. So it's just making things up as we go along. And to your point, if you have something that is your IP, don't put it in there. Did you say platform.ai?
Yes.
Yeah, is a tool.
So it's still access to GPT, but you just set up $5 of credits, and it charges you I think it works out $15 per million tokens, and a million tokens is something like 500,000 words, or 400,000 words. So you're getting a lot of bang for your buck with that, and you can still access GPT-4, etc. But it automatically excludes your data from future learning, so you're not having the same issues with, ChatGPT is free ultimately to use because they are using your data to inform future learning. So the benefit to them is the research that they're able to do because they've given you free access to the tool. So it's just to, be mindful of that. And the hallucination, it's called, when AI just makes things up, is a real issue. And it's also why large language models, even though they have taken a lot of attention away from search engines, so Google has dropped 4 percentage points in last month in terms of market share of search. Wow. And we're seeing a real shift there. It's the first time it's the first time in decades that it's happened. It's a really big deal. And it's because we are seeing people change the way that they interact. They're using ChatGPT to get answers for things because they don't want to have to filter through 30 million Google results in order to find what they're looking for. But the problem is that ChatGPT can't be factually relied upon to give you an answer in and of itself. So ChatGPT has actually integrated Bing, and now for certain searches, if you use ChatGPT to ask it something, you'll see a little purple icon and it's thinking about it. And it's because it's using Bing to find the most relevant and up-to-date information via a search engine. So the large language models can't be changed and updated in the way that a search engine algorithm can be. So and that's where Perplexity AI comes in, where you've got this sort of blend of the large language model with the search engine technology, but you can't rely upon a large language model to give you factually accurate information because it's a closed system and a search engine isn't a closed system. So when you're asking it things, anything factual needs to be double and triple checked, but people are really starting to prioritize convenience over truth in an interesting way, where they don't necessarily care that it's not factually accurate. If they go into ChatGPT, they want a starting point, and then some people will find their way to truth eventually. But this is a real interesting tension between truth and convenience and what people's priorities are when it comes to interacting with content on the internet.
It's interesting. I feel like ChatGPT or OpenAI is Bing's way back to ranking higher as a search. But we also know that people go on TikTok now for search, and that also is a lot of misinformation. I think I read a statistic that Gen Z is the largest spreaders of misinformation because they're just going on TikTok and sharing things without doing any fact checking. So it sounds like misinformation is going to be an even bigger issue and thing that we have to solve for overall, whether it's social media, using AI tools, search.
Yeah, and that comes down to media literacy in our education systems, but also as adults as well who've exited the education system. We need to continue to understand what it looks like to communicate and engage with information on the internet. The context collapse that social media creates, I think, has just negatively impacted people's reading comprehension because people expect every video to be created for them. And I think there's wider things here that we could talk about that would be so tangential, but things like cancel culture, right? Where there are some situations where something has been taken out of context and then that has been used as the sort of catalyst for this wider cancellation. And sometimes it's for legitimate reasons. Other times it is because actually there's no context or nuance around it at all. And people's expectations are that everything is visible all the time. And I think that's like the first iteration of the internet has given us this sense that like, if I can't see it, I don't believe it. Or if I can't see it, it's not true. And so as small business owners, it's like, oh, what does it mean for me to be authentic on the internet? Like if I'm not being fully myself on the internet, I'm not being real and I'm not being real with my audience. And actually, sometimes we just need to be professionals on the internet, and it is irrelevant if you've had a bad day or you're not emotionally in the mood to like show up. But it's just this tension of like, okay, what does it mean for me to be authentic? And also this idea of like context collapse. And so misinformation, I think, and the idea of like reading comprehension and this understanding that like there's a bigger world outside of the internet. Sometimes we need to go outside and touch grass a little bit. This sense that as we engage with things online, we do always want to be using our critical thinking faculties and making sure that we analyze what we're reading, encourage people to do that. So it's, one of the things that you can do as a business owner is, yes, cite your sources, but also just talk naturally about the other people in your space who you might be referencing. And just this idea that you're a connected part of like an online community of people who are engaging with these topics. And ironically, that's what off-page SEO has always been doing when it comes to Google search is, getting your peers to effectively cross-reference you and provide citations that show that you're a credible source of information. But I think that, to your point about Bing is at like 8.1% market share in search, which is the highest it's been for years and years. So that's in like North America. I think it's Statista or like Statistic Counter, like those websites, really worth watching in terms of search trends, because it's absolutely fascinating to see how it's changing at the moment. And Bing has been definitely on an upward trend since Microsoft invested in OpenAI. And, that's why Google has, to speak to like misinformation, a lot of the negative PR that AI got in the first quarter of 2023 can be traced back to ex-Google employees who, when you actually like read the articles, like ex-chief AI officer of Google says that AI is going to destroy humanity. And I think we just want to be super cognizant that like Google's lost 4 percentage points, which equates to, I think it's like around $10 billion a year in revenue for them from an ads perspective, because they're making like $265 billion a year from ads revenue, which they can only make if people are using their search engine. So for them to drop 4 percentage points is literally, a $10 billion drop. So Microsoft investing in OpenAI using Bing and ChatGPT, we're really seeing some huge cultural shifts on the internet and billions of dollars at stake if you are late to the game. And there's a few people who've, like read about AI all the time, but it's like my bookshelf behind me. It's a great Zoom background, but it also is like a whole load of and marketing resources. But the idea of AI being first to market with AI, back in 2017, people wrote about the fact that, these tech companies were saying, oh, if you're late to the race in AI, you're going out of business. It was like this race to AI was this race to stay in business and to stay relevant. And so a lot of the messaging that we are seeing around the fear-mongering in particular is through this lens of, okay, much bigger companies than we will ever be, or maybe ever would even aspire to be, are really trying to make sure that they survive in the next era of the internet with these emerging technologies. And so the best thing that we can do is focus on what we do and what we do for our customers and who our customers are, and feel really confident in what our message is and the impact that we're having, so that regardless of the changes that happen on the internet and regardless of which channels survive and which channels change, we can show up, because showing up on those channels is just a tactical piece. It's just something that, how do you submit your sitemap or your website to Perplexity AI instead of to Google Search Console? Like, those things are relatively small task-based things that are straightforward if we understand who our businesses are for and the change that we are wanting to see in the world as we run them.
And you've created a system called Marketing Magic. And this is a way for small businesses to save up to 40 hours a week using AI tool. A month, sorry.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, it's good, but it's not quite that good.
eventually maybe. But a month, but that's still a huge time and cost savings For small business owners, many of whom are bootstrapped and don't necessarily have extra funds, in the bank to spend on all the team members that they need to run their businesses or to get to the next level. So you talk a little bit about the impetus behind Marketing Magic, what it is and how it helps. Does it do a full evaluation? Do you do the evaluation and then help decipher what tools are important for a business owner?
Yeah, so basically it's an AI-powered business growth tool is the shortest way of describing it. When you sign up to it, you just add your website homepage and it will pull out relevant information to create a brand profile for your business. And then you can add different types of product. So let's say you've got a service that you provide, you can add the link to an existing service page or you can set it up from scratch. But once you've done that, it'll create a to-do list for that product to say, here are the assets that you need for the core service offer information that doesn't change, the sales asset to bring people through your checkout process, and then the marketing assets to bring traffic over to those sales assets. And so each tool then has a link over to the relevant tool in Marketing Magic that can help you generate that content. And it just means that you're not having to think about strategically what are all the different things that you need to have captured in order to have a productized offer in your business. You don't have to think about things like mapping out the customer journey for every single product because all of the tools in Marketing Magic are informed by that marketing strategy so that you can focus on doing what you love doing. It was funny because I demoed it for somebody earlier today and I was showing them because we'd been talking about customer journey mapping and the fact that it could take 100 hours to map out a customer journey if you're doing it manually, and you can do it on Marketing Magic in 5 minutes. And he was like, oh yeah, I'm going to check this out at some point when I've got a bit more capacity. How much is it? And I was like, oh, it's $29 a month if you've got one business. And he was like, what? That is wild. I was expecting you to say $4.99 a month.
Yeah.
And that meets the part of the question that's what drives you to do it. And with emerging technologies, what you can see in the landscape of AI tools is a lot of people who are like, oh, gold rush, great. I can charge $500 a month for this system that's going to help people save time. That's not sustainable, and it also ends up being aimed at more enterprise level or corporate businesses. Small business owners often bootstrapped, as you've said, bootstrapped. Again, I work with a lot of creatives where their capacity for revenue is capped at the amount that they make with their own hands because they're artists. And so $500 a month is not a sustainable or accessible price point for them to access this kind of support. So the idea behind it is that it's sustainable and accessible for business owners of all sizes, and that when you are building out your business, you can go from idea to implementation, and there are tools that are going to help you to do that without needing to learn how to be your own full-time marketing strategist, without needing to, worry about how to repurpose a podcast episode into a blog post or spend a lot of time, just content repurposing or reformatting things in different ways. So that's really the heart behind it, is that it's a tool that helps real people grow their small businesses and get back to doing, what they love to do. So yeah.
That's wonderful. And it's definitely something I'm going to be sharing with my students at USC Edinburgh, who are all creating capstone projects and need to understand a lot of this. And they're students, but they're also working full time, have families. They don't have the time and they're new to this journey. So I want to take us through an example using my podcast, for instance.
Yeah.
So for my podcast right now, I use AI tools to create all of the content, to create reels. I have somebody who creates graphics. We put them into a folder, but then I want to make sure that all of the blog posts and content is uploaded to my website properly. I want to make sure that all of the people who have been guests, they get their folder with all of the assets. I also want to make sure I'm sending emails out. And so I have all of these different systems, right? And then I also have podcast coaching. So I have all of these different systems that might be talking to each other, but might not. So do you still have to have these outside tools, or do you have does this integrate with some of the tools you have, or do you say, oh, you really don't need that? This one will work better, maybe be a cost savings?
Yeah. So as far as taking podcast content, for instance, the idea behind Marketing Magic is that you can come up with episode content and ideas for the positioning of your content that are going to enable you to get long-term visibility and traffic because it aligns with your audience. You can also create your, obviously, individual assets as well. but then you can repurpose the content from the podcast episode into blog posts and emails and, add them to your evergreen sequence. So at the moment, it doesn't help with things like video repurposing, for instance, because I've been very cautious that the idea of marketing magic is really the strategic and the also capturing your tone of voice. So one of the big things that we've worked on over the last 18 months has been, how do we make sure that AI sounds as close to your tone of voice as possible so that you're having to do less of the actual content editing. So it doesn't do things like, trim your videos and repurpose the actual video tools and things like that. And then the graphic side of things, again, a feature within that helps you with that side of things. But we do have workflows built into Marketing Magic that help people understand, okay, if I want to publish a podcast episode or I want to publish create a blog post, these are all the tasks that I need to think about. And so then for the tasks that Marketing Magic does help with, it links across and then it gives like a really clear instruction for like, now you need to make this decision or now you need to proofread this piece of content. So the idea is that it's still simplifying the mental process and the context switching, even if you're using other tools that are more suited to things like creating your design assets, for instance. So for me, the biggest piece of like just the time suck was repurposing long form content. One of my favorite features that I had like built into the first version of Marketing Magic was summarizing the key quotes out of an episode or a teaching or whatever. Like 15 quotes where you can just literally copy and paste them into a social post or put them in a graphic or use them to promote an episode or whatever. So there's some of those things that are kind of a little bit more around your messaging and your strategic positioning that make sure that your wider content flows with your offers and that everything that you put out there naturally flows into your areas of expertise and gives you an easy way to say, if you're interested in this, actually, check out more in this product that I have or this offer that I have. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there is a URL we can send people to get a 7-day free trial.
Yeah, you can find it in the show notes, I'm guessing, or somewhere. But yeah, you find me or find Marketing Magic. I'm pretty easy to find because of my name on the internet. So yeah, do check it out and give it a try. And yeah, it's a fun thing to try out and just see how it potentially can help with some of the things that take the most amount of time or energy in your business at the minute. But as far as AI in general, it's such a fun space to kind of play around in. I encourage anyone who's like thinking about being in the online space in the next 10 years to, set aside a couple of hours a week for 3 or 4 weeks and play around with some of the different tools that are out there and look at the different ways that the time-consuming or creativity-draining tasks that you're faced with can be automated and, dream big about what's possible if you had an extra 40 hours a week. And 40 hours a week, I did it there. 40 hours a month in your business, your professional life, your personal life.
Oh, gosh. Menekse, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I could keep you on for hours to keep talking about AI. I love your passion and I love the self-taught ability that, you started with SEO as a teenager, you continued learning, and now you've created this system that is going to help so many people to just help their businesses propel forward and understand the best use cases for AI. So thank you for bringing that to the world.
Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, it's been great to chat with you. So thank you so much.
And I do want to ask, do you have a quote, mantra, or some words that you live by that help you get through every day and keep inspiring you?
Yeah, this might be a really British thing, but it's what's the worst that could happen? I feel like as a culture, British people tend to be a little bit more on the pessimistic side. But for me, it's like a freeing thing where if you ask yourself what's the worst that could happen and you're happy with the answer, then go for it. And what have you got to lose? Because it could just be the start of something really magical.
Fantastic. And I've been speaking with Menekse Stewart, marketingmagic.app/trial-sign-up, which I will also put in the show notes for those of you who are not fast enough to write this down. Thank you for watching or listening to this episode and all of the wonderful advice that Menekse brought to us today. I'll be back again with another amazing guest very soon. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.